Ambassador Kuechler, can you hear us now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Welcome, Professor Samuelson just concluded her introduction of you, and welcome to our group. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Shall I start?
Please.
Okay,
yes,
thank
please.
you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind invitation and for the opportunity to speak at the Arizona State University Genocide Awareness Week. I will speak about Holocaust distortion and what we can do against it. But first, I would like to have a short, some words about genocide in general. The day before yesterday, President Zelensky of Ukraine visited Bucha on the outskirts of Kiev, the Ukrainian capital. Videos and photos of the streets of Bucha after the Russian army had left the town have circulated on the web and on TV for some days. They apparently show the corpses of civilians, unarmed, some with their hands tied, murdered by shots to the head. Some are in their cars, often whole families, run over by tanks. Some show signs of torture and rape. President Zelensky called these atrocities genocide. Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jewish lawyer, coined the term genocide during the 1940s to describe measures against the Armenians by the Ottoman Empire or of the German Nazi regime in Europe. His efforts to codify genocide as an independent crime resulted in the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It will be the task of international lawyers to establish whether the killings of civilians in Ukraine are to be considered genocide or another type of war crime. But war crimes they are. I forgot to share my screen with you. Just wait a minute. I will try and do so. Here. Okay. Well, seems it doesn't work.
You should be able to.
Wait a minute. I have it here. I tried it before, and it worked. No. Well, if it doesn't work, it's not so important.
Good. Okay.
Oh, it says that only the host can allow me to share my screen. Okay, never mind.
Ambassador Kuechler, you should be able to do this now.
Okay.
I'm sorry about the kerfuffle.
Okay. I'll try again. Looks better. Yes.
There we go.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
This is about Raphael Lemkin. Raphael Lemkin, he coined the term genocide, and he achieved to codify genocide in the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Lemkin lost his whole family during the Holocaust, with the exception of his brother and his sister in-law. The Holocaust was clearly a genocide, but it was more than that. It aimed at eradicating all Jewishness globally. According to the ideology of the Nazis, the world's political order and principles of racial equality, which they sought to change, was based on Jewish ideas. So the Nazis' approach was global and it was absolute. If the Holocaust was a genocide with special characteristics that make it unprecedented, then the question is, can we compare the Holocaust to other genocides? In my country, in Germany, we very much stress the singularity of the Holocaust. It is rather recent that academics, mainly Holocaust researchers, have started to compare the Holocaust to other genocides. This development has, in my opinion, also contributed to the fact that in classrooms and school books, today students not only learn about the Holocaust, but also about the genocide of the Sinti and Roma that was also committed in German Nazi death camps. Comparison can help understand similarities and differences between mass atrocities. But to compare does not mean to equalize. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the ODIHR, has published educational guidance to be followed when comparing the Holocaust to other genocides. It has also warned that there are, and I quote, certain reasons and strategies for comparing the Holocaust to other genocides that are not fruitful and that definitely should be avoided. Some of these are, and you will see them here on the screen. Number one, that is not important for our subject here. Then number two, the Holocaust is seen as a means of political power in contemporary politics, and the link to the Holocaust is made out of political considerations. Thirdly, the link to other genocides is made to diminish or trivialize the Holocaust. The phenomena described under 2 and 3 would be widely seen during demonstrations against anti-corona measures, and they reappeared last week in Berlin during pro-Russian demonstrations. So very diverse subjects, but the same symbols being shown in the street, especially the star symbols being widely used, mostly in the variant of the yellow star Jews were forced to wear during the Nazi period. People who wear the stars equalize their situation with those of Jews who were murdered by the Nazis. The situation of demonstrators is far from a comparable threat, very far. We call this phenomenon Holocaust distortion. In Germany, it is punishable by law under certain conditions. Police have been following up on it, and cases have been brought to court in connection with the anti-corona measure demonstrations since almost a year. We cannot accept that demonstrators today trivialize the Holocaust, the greatest crime in mankind. For some years now, Holocaust denial and distortion have been gaining traction. And while denial is easy to spot, distortion often goes unchallenged. Allowing distortion invites the erosion of our understanding of the Holocaust and its significance. It helps sustain an environment in which Holocaust denial, antisemitism, conspiracy myths, and dangerous forms of nationalism can thrive. Distortion fans the flames of hate, threatens democracy, and allows antisemitism to inch towards the mainstream. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance has become increasingly concerned over how history has been undermined, how the Holocaust and its legacy have been misused, threatening social, political, and cultural values and norms in the process. And it has made countering this threat a priority. In 2013, the ODIHR already in 2013, almost 10 years ago, the ODIHR adopted a working definition of Holocaust denial and distortion, a practical tool to help in identifying this phenomenon. In 2020, the ODIHR adopted a statement in which its 34 member countries condemned all attempts to rehabilitate the reputations of persons complicit in the crimes of the Holocaust and the genocide of the Roma. To identify and promote strategies for countering distortion, the German presidency of the ODIHR in 2020 and 2021 also established the Global Task Force Against Holocaust Distortion. As with anti-Semitism, it is essential that we not only raise awareness of the dangers of distortion, but also that we are able to better identify and respond to it when it appears. In January 2021, the ODIHR published recommendations for policy and decision makers on recognizing and countering Holocaust distortion. Experts worked on these recommendations intensely for a year, together with many organizations also from the US. In order to counter Holocaust distortion effectively, action is needed on various levels, involving many different groups, from professionals to policymakers to journalists. So, what can we do to counter distortion? 4 areas require urgent attention: memorials and museums, monitoring, training, and social media. Experts stress that international cooperation on research, education, and museums work is crucial. We know that memorials and museums need more support and resources to address Holocaust distortion, as they are often on the front lines. We just heard about the efforts to build a Holocaust museum in Phoenix, Arizona, and they will be on the front line to teach about the Holocaust, to teach about other genocides, and also to address attempts to minimize these crimes. Especially in light of the constraints of the pandemic, Holocaust-related institutions need sustainable support for developing suitable educational approaches and new exhibitions. Secondly, monitoring. More effort needs to be put into monitoring this issue as well. More data and research is desperately needed. Countering distortion is not easy, and the more knowledge available, the better equipped we will be to address it. The ODIHR's experts strongly recommend greater training and awareness raising at the local, national, and regional levels, so that various professional groups have the capacity and skills to effectively address distortion. This includes policy and decision makers like ministry officials, local authorities, media professionals, lawmakers, and the judiciary and police, as well as staff of social media and tech companies. Through the ODIHR's work, one thing has become overwhelmingly clear. Knowing the facts is important, but it is not enough. The facts must be respected. They must be protected from the threat of Holocaust distortion. And everyone must take part. #ProtectTheFacts, a joint campaign of the ODIHR with the European Commission, the United Nations, and UNESCO, is helping raise awareness of Holocaust distortion and the dangers it poses to democracy and to open society. I can only encourage you and your institutions to take part in this global campaign and help build a broad and strong coalition against distortion. No one individual or nation or organization can defeat Holocaust distortion alone. It does not stop at national borders and requires an international response. Distortion is more than just offensive. It threatens the very heart of our democratic values and of our free and open societies, whether in the form of a Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt, which we saw on 6th January 2021 in front of the Congress building in Washington, whether a yellow star pinned to the shirt of people demonstrating against coronavirus measures, or comparisons to Sophie Scholl or Anne Frank. Distortion represents attempts to desensitize people to the history of Holocaust, to its facts. It symbolizes the rejection of the lessons of this history and the value system built in its wake. Countering distortion requires all of us. I was heartened to see our efforts already receive support from the highest political levels, including former Chancellor Angela Merkel and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. This level of support is essential. I'm truly impressed by the measures taken against Holocaust distortion and anti-Semitism by the not so new administration in the US, and look forward to the United States' continued engagement in this global effort to counter these phenomena. Together, Germany and the US have established a US-German dialogue on Holocaust issues that will address these questions as well. Remembering the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust is the responsibility not only of governments, but of societies as a whole. As we reflect upon this history and its enduring effects, we uphold the terrible truth of the Holocaust against those who deny it. As individuals, as societies, as an international community, we must carry on with this important work. Today, we are reminded to strive for a world that protects the facts from distortion, for a world that remembers the Holocaust, for a world without genocide. Thank you very much. I'm open for questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let's get started here with questions in the audience first. And go ahead, Josh.
Sure. Thank you so much for everything, for what you do and for the talk today. I'd like to ask you about the issue, thinking about the ODIHR definition of Holocaust denial and whatnot, with which I'm very familiar. You know, obviously we have to push back against distortion. We have to push back against outright denialism. We have to push back against falsehoods. But it seems to me that the reason we teach and study the Holocaust is not just remembrance, and it's not voyeurism either. It's not because we really find it fascinating and exciting to see it, but rather it's because of the issue of repetition and human nature and so on. So it seems to me at some level, we have to be able to make comparisons between different parts of the Holocaust story. Not just, when I say the Holocaust, I mean broadly. I mean, not only 1941, 42, but 39, 33, whatever it may be. And if we don't make those comparisons with nuance, carefully, and with all of the skills we can muster as diplomats or historians like myself or whatever it may be, then it becomes pointless. That the entire point is to make careful comparisons. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you very much for that statement. I agree. It's not only about remembering, it's about a world without genocide. And it is true that in Germany we have been, excuse me, I'm just recovering from COVID, so I'm still having a little bit of a funny voice. In Germany, we have been very reluctant to compare the Holocaust to other genocides, and it's very recent that we have started doing so. But I think it is absolutely necessary to compare the Holocaust or elements of the Holocaust to other genocides, because if you don't do that, then you don't find out about the characteristics of the Holocaust, which was still, it was a genocide, but with special characteristics, and in that it was unique. But yes, you are right. We have to compare, but but we also have to protect the facts. But because without the facts, we cannot relate to what is happening today or what has happened since 1945 in the world. And we have seen mass atrocity, too many mass atrocities since the end of World War II, up to our up to today. I mean, what we have seen in Ukraine, the killing of so many people. As I said, international lawyers will have to define if that was a genocide or a mass atrocity, but still it remains killing of hundreds and thousands of civilians which should not have been killed and which are clearly war crimes. So yes, I think you're right. It's not, we must compare, and we must be able to bridge the events of the Holocaust from the past to events today. And it is very important to start in the year 1933, or maybe even earlier, as Goldhagen did in his book describing about how the anti-Semitism of the 19th century developed into a racial anti-Semitism, especially in Germany. But we have to start at least in 1933, because the Holocaust did not fall from the sky. It was many small measures over 2000 or so, until the camps started, until the deportations started. So there were many measures of depriving people of their rights, of expropriation, of trying to motivate them to emigrate. Many measures were there, and if you go to the Jewish Museum in Berlin, you will see an impressive collection of these measures almost every day, a new one, which against Jews, which prepared for the Holocaust.
Yeah, actually, I would like to pose a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right. So my question has two parts. First part is, what's the role of technology in Holocaust distortion? If you can comment primarily on technology per se. And the follow-up question is, what's the role of the transnational corporations, especially Facebook and or Twitter and other technology companies that actually facilitate and in the dissemination of disinformation, misinformation, and so forth. And I guess the third follow-up could be, what's the role of the UN or organizations that you are involved in clamping down on that situation? So it's a three-part question.
I'm sorry, I did not get the first question. What is the role of?
Technology.
Technology. Well, it relates a bit to the second question, because technology helps to disseminate Holocaust distortion. Like in the 16th century, the printing, which was discovered and widely spread, helped to disseminate anti-Semitism already then. Not only good ideas, but also anti-Semitism. Like in the 1930s or 1920s, 1930s, radio and later on television helped to disseminate anti-Semitism. Today, it is the internet, it is the social media who help to disseminate disinformation, anti-Semitism, racism, and well, you name it. So there have been efforts going on to work with the especially in social media companies like Meta for Facebook, with Google and with others. They were all invited to the Malmö International Forum Against Holocaust, to remember the Holocaust, which took place last year in October in Malmö in Sweden. And they were asked to do pledges in order to refine their filters and to filter out what can be considered as Holocaust distortion. In our talks with the the American, with the Department of State of the United States. We also discuss about how we can find algorithms or technology to not let come these messages about Holocaust distortion to the surface. The problem with reacting to them is that by reacting to them, you make them bigger, because you react to a message and then with you cite it by reacting to it. So it's very difficult to react to those posts which contain Holocaust distortion. A better way could be to post facts about the Holocaust and make these messages abundant, and not the ones on Holocaust distortion. Did I answer all the questions? I'm not sure. Yes, the role of the international organizations. Yes. Well, ODIHR is an expert-driven organization. We have now 35 member states in Canada, United States, Australia, Argentina, and then most of the other states are over here in Europe. All the member states of the European Union are members or will shortly become members of the ODIHR. But ODIHR is a small organization. So you have the 35 heads of delegation, which are diplomats like I am, and you have about 200 experts. So what ODIHR does in order to have a broader public for its ideas and its instruments which it develops, is to cooperate with international institutions like the United Nations, like the UNESCO, like the European Union, like the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, like the European Council, the Council of Europe, I'm sorry. So that's what we do. We cooperate with them, and through the network, for instance, of UNESCO, ODIHR is able to distribute its material on teaching and learning about the Holocaust, and shortly also its material on teaching and learning about the genocide of the Sinti and Roma. Or when having a joint commemoration on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, 27th of January, ODIHR, together with the United Nations, we reach a much larger public with our messages at ODIHR. And that is why it is so important for us to work together with international organizations and to be present also in countries like Canada, like the United States, because that helps to deliver also material which you can trust, because it has been revised by many experts from around the world, and on which teachers, when in classroom, they can trust and they can find help and assistance for how and what to teach about the Holocaust.
So can you hear me? No, maybe I should use this mic.
Why don't you come here? Yeah, we have a question from the audience online.
Can you hear me now, Ambassador?
Hello, yes.
Yes, okay. We got a question here from Sherry Daniels, who thanks you for your talk. And Sherry asks, regarding the task of training that you mentioned, what ways have been found the most successful so far in creating Holocaust literacy / questioning and confirming the credibility of online sources? How does one get at that crucial skill set?
Good question.
Yeah, well, I think it always helps to consult the ODIHR webpage, holocaustRemembrance.com, where you can find material on how to teach the Holocaust. Over here in Germany, we have we have 16 states, as you might know, and every state has the authority over school books. So in total, we have around 600 school books with 1 or 2 pages about the Holocaust. And they all go through an authorization process of the competent ministries in federal states. So there is a sort of quality check for these textbooks, but this does not prevent 100% that all of it is correct in all of the over 600 textbooks we have. What I think is important in teaching about the Holocaust is not to stop at school age. First of all, I think it should be compulsory in every school at different ages, and also maybe in different subjects. So not only in history, but also like social sciences or religious education or ethics, or even in language. So if you're reading books in English classes or German classes, it could be books dealing with the Holocaust, maybe from the perspective of a child or from the perspective of a teenager or of an adult. And it should come up in different age levels at school, 2 or 3 times. It should include, I think, if possible, a trip to a memorial site, which is difficult, of course, for places overseas. It should include, if possible, a talk with a survivor, which will be very difficult in the near future. And I'm glad that we have videos with survivors. That is already something. And it should be continued also at older age. It should be continued during university studies or during vocational training. It should be continued especially for special professions, for special professionals like police, like the judiciary, like doctors. If we look at the medical, the experiments, medical experiments, and Dr. Mengele in Auschwitz. So doctors, medical doctors also have a responsibility. Also economists, because this war was financed, and economists also have a responsibility. So I think teaching about the Holocaust is something like lifelong learning, because also academics find new facts, find new data about the Holocaust, and there's always something new to be learned about it. Yes, and well, thank you very much, Cherry, and for your question. Looking forward to seeing you over here in Germany soon.
Thank you, Ambassador. And we have another question online. Considering ongoing campaigns in the US to limit Holocaust remembrance studies and promote distortions, what do you think can be done to counteract these efforts? What is the main message you think is crucial for students to understand about the Holocaust?
I think one of the main messages is that one should always take into account the human nature. It is often been said, those who committed the Holocaust, they were like animals. I disagree. They were not like animals. I know no animal species which kills one another. The only species on this planet that kills one another is mankind. And I think we should always remember, and we should always be taught that under certain conditions, with manipulation, with demagogy, we can be brought to do things we never would have thought in our dreams we are able to do. And I think that is a lesson which we should really learn from the Holocaust. One of the survivors once put it and said, it has happened once, it can happen again. I do not hope that it happens again, but you always have to take into consideration the human nature and sensitize for that, so that really it can never happen again.
Ambassador Kuechler, if I may ask a question too, this is Volker Benkert. And yesterday I spoke about German efforts to come to terms with the past, and I kind of critiqued the book by Susan Neyman, that kind of learning from the Germans, saying that Germany is a role model for other countries and coming to terms. And I was ungracious and said, no, it's at best imperfect, just as it took too long. The process is not complete, and sometimes it's also very redemptive. But there were colleagues here in the room, Joshua Shanes and Henry Thoreau, who vehemently disagreed and said that Germany is a role model and German efforts are admirable, and in many ways they are. But maybe I can ask you this question. Learning from the Germans, is that something that we should promote, or are the processes too different to be compared?
Well, I have a twofold answer to this. I think we've done quite well since 1979, maybe 1968, but definitely between 1979. Before that, we were too slow. We let too many people get away with it. We have still cases in court today with over 90-year-old perpetrators, which is the effect of not having been consequent in prosecuting all the cases. And so I think until the 1960s, 1970s, there have been some exemplary cases in court, like the famous Auschwitz processes in Frankfurt in the early 1960s, and then of course the Nuremberg trials in 1945 already. But in general, before 1960s, 70s, we were not very good at remembering the Holocaust. And I listened today to a talk by a young German professional who had searched the files of the Federal Foreign Office from the 1960s to 1979 to the 1970s, stopped in 1979, on German-Israeli relations. And he found out that diplomats at that time, and that reflects the general spirit of German population at that time, diplomats at that time, they were rather cold towards Israel. They were rather not understanding the significance, for instance, of terrorist attacks like the one which happened in Munich. They were, some of that, what was in the files was clearly anti-Semitic. So I would agree with you, Volker Benkert, that we were not good at it. I think we did better later on, and the game changer in my eyes was the miniseries Holocaust with Meryl Streep, which was televised in 1979. Only on the third, at that time we had 3 TV programs, first, second, and third, and the third were regional. And it was not broadcasted on the first or second channel, which were national, but on the third channels, which were regional, out of fear that this might cause criticism, because it was emotional. It was emotional. And it was broadcast, and almost 50% of the adult population watched it, which is a huge number, even if you only have 3 TV channels, which is a huge number. And if you speak to people of my generation, they all saw it. They all watched it. They were teenagers at the time, and they all watched it. And this was a game changer because everybody could identify with this normal German family who went through hell. And from then on, I think we started developing real good material and real good examples on how to teach about the Holocaust. I don't know if this can serve as an example to other countries, but yes, I think since then we have done a pretty good job. On the other hand, if you watch the World Jewish Congress's survey, you still will find that about 30% of youngsters will say they have never heard about the Holocaust, or they don't know what word Holocaust means. But on the other hand, if you ask the question, if they know what Auschwitz means, then you get a much higher turnout on the right answer.
Thank you so much. There's one more question here.
Hello. I'm sure you have probably heard about the controversy here with critical race theory, where they're not wanting to teach a lot of information about racism in the schools because they don't want the children to feel or be identified as victims, or the children of the races that were perceived as the perpetrators of feeling guilty. And so they don't want to teach it in school. I was wondering if you have learned anything about teaching in school that can avoid these reasons they're giving for not teaching these very important topics in schools. Do you have any specific ideas of curricula that teach this so kids don't feel like they're identified as victims or feel guilty as perpetrators?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that is very important, not to make especially kids feel like victims. And as the previous speaker already said, Jews are not only victims. Jews have a whole culture and life to be celebrated. We did that in Germany last year. We celebrated 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany. And I think that was a good thing to do because of more than 80 million people living in Germany, we estimate only 200,000 are Jewish. So a German hardly ever meets a Jew, or if he meets a Jew, then he probably is not aware of it, because physically a Jew is not so different from an average German. So I think to speak positively about minorities in a society would help a lot. I will give you an example. In the school of my children, which is a bilingual school, German-English, they have in every February, they celebrate Black History Month. So February is Black History Month. The day after tomorrow, we will celebrate International Roma Day, which is a day about the citizens' rights movement of the Roma, of what they have achieved, of what there still is to be done, we celebrate their culture, their songs, their theater, their way to dress. So I think speaking positively about minorities would make others perhaps also more curious about wanting to know what is it with other with people who are a minority in our society. I hope I'm not too idealistic about that, but I'm not a teacher, and maybe teachers have better ideas on how to deal with your question, which I think is very legitimate.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Kuechler. We're very, very pleased that you could join us. I know you're still recovering, and all the more, thank you very much.